What's going on YouTube? It's Tej back again with another video, and today I'm giving you an interesting video and something I've been planning on doing for a while. 6 coaches who either already are, or in my opinion, should be on the hot seat as we creep closer towards the 2021-2022 NFL season. Not saying these guys will be fired or that they should be. A lot can change between now and about a year's from now's time. But these are some names maybe to keep your eyes on and watch the seat start to simmer or watch it start to boil and then potentially lose their job. I will have a companion video to this, or essentially a companion video to this. It'll basically be me breaking down some potential new hires at the head coaching position once we get to next offseason and we get into the fun head coaching carousel. But also, I wanted to make mention of this. I forgot to mention it in the Julio Jones trade reaction. Sorry for no videos this past week. I was actually on vacation at the beach with a couple of my friends and my girlfriend, so that was a good time. Got to relax and whatnot, but also I have a full-time job and I am a play-by-play broadcaster, and I am employed by a baseball team whose season is now underway. So I wanted to give a heads up. You might see a few less videos per week, or you might start seeing videos get a little bit shorter to save me some time in the day between what pays the bills, what job I'm trying to pursue throughout the rest of my life as a play-by-play broadcaster, but also fit these in with a busy schedule. So apologies for that, but also let me know if you prefer shorter videos, or maybe if I had time to do longer videos, just maybe one less a week. I'd love to have your thoughts down in the comment section, because I don't have to go on the tangents that I normally do. But if you like those tangents and want longer videos, I'd love to hear it. But if you want me to be short, succinct, to the point, I can also make that happen. And on that note, let's jump into it, and let's talk about coach number 6. And this is one of the coaches, I actually kind of have these already made into groups, but 5 and 6 I don't think are on the hot seat. But with the disappointing 2021, you might start to see, to go back to that stove analogy, you might start to see the oven turn on. Mike McCarthy, right? I mean, obviously a really bad first season in Dallas, but hey, he's playing with a terrible defense. Mike Nolan proved to be a bad hire as a defensive coordinator, and you lose Dak Prescott. Those 3 things are going to lead you to, obviously, a sub-500 record, and you're going to be picking top 10 in the draft. I totally get all that. I'm saying if they don't turn around this year, that's when it starts to get interesting. Plus, you're playing in Dallas. And I know they kept Jason Garrett around for, 10, 12 years? Too long, in my opinion. So I don't know if Jerry Jones would move on from McCarthy. The two seem to get along really well, and if Jones gave Garrett that much of a leash, you got to think McCarthy's probably working with something close to that. So 2 years isn't exactly on that timeline, but this is also a team that's starting to get desperate. I mean, I'd argue it's already desperate. They haven't been to the Super Bowl since the 90s, and only won a handful of playoff games between the Romo to now Dak Prescott eras of QBs, and 2 very high caliber QBs. So that tension will mount up, and it's going to fall to the fault of someone. And I think Mike McCarthy might be that guy. Additionally, it's been a long time since we see him have a winning record. You'll see that stat on your screen now, and that was with Aaron Rodgers playing as maybe the best quarterback in the league at that point. If not one, he was 2 right behind Brady. And it's still been 4 years, going on 5 if you want to count this upcoming season. We'll see. But this is just a name to keep your eye on. I think the expectations are set high because of how good that offense can be, but if things don't work out, the defense holds them back too much, or if there's just cluttered chaos, those type of indicators, maybe the team doesn't look like it's motivated, those little things, keep your eyes on that throughout the rest of the season. I don't think Jerry Jones would make this quick of a decision on Mike McCarthy after 2 years, but if the Cowboys underwhelm this year, the seat has got to start getting warm for McCarthy. And that takes us to our number 5 candidate, Jon Gruden. This is another one where it's like, I don't think the Raiders would move on from him, right? You give him a 10-year contract, you're going to at least let him get more than halfway through that. But going into year 4 now, hasn't had a winning season, though it has gotten better each and every year, record-wise at least. But this team feels like it's not getting anywhere, right? Every positive move they make a weird one that kind of makes you rethink about where this team is at in your eyes. Additionally, Mike Mayock as the GM, and I think Jon Gruden plays a big hand of this, they just objectively have not drafted well in many people's eyes, but also the results. I took Josh Jacobs in the first round, who's probably the best first-round pick they've had. Maybe him or Clelin Ferrell, but hey, while we're talking about Clelin Ferrell, he's a pretty good run stopper, but he's not a pass rusher that should go top 5. He went the number 4 pick over a guy like Brian Burns, who's among the best pass rushers in the NFL. And it's not like Ferrell's stock was set at number 4 at the time of the selection. He was falling into that mid to late first round conversation, but the Raiders, I guess saw him as their guy, took him at number 4. But again, back to Jacobs, they took him in that same draft, and he's a good player, but look at him at the end of last year when that offensive line was banged up and just overall wasn't as good. Sub 3 yards a carry kind of guy. And that's kind of the nature of the position in a lot of ways, unless you are a Derrick Henry, generational type of dude. Maybe Christian McCaffrey, because of his pass catching ability, you can find ways to use him and get different production from him despite having a bad offensive line. But all that to say, that's not Josh Jacobs. I think he's very good, but you're going to need a good offensive line to help take him from good to being first round worthy in a lot of people's eyes. And then also Jonathan Abram. I mean, I like the kid. He hits hard, he plays hard, but he's not merited a first round pick to this point in his career. I mean, there's still some time that could change, but between bad drafts and now you're playing in Vegas, expectations are set. I know you play in a tough division, but if it's a disappointing 4th season for Jon Gruden, and this is just like Mike McCarthy, I think the seat starts to simmer. I think it starts to get warm. I don't think there's any changes made for the Cowboys or for the Raiders. But these are two coaches that keep your eyes on it, how the media covers it, but also just the feelings in and around the team. Does the team look like it's motivated to go out there and play? Because that's typically the big indicator that there's going to be a coaching change coming. If the guys aren't ready to play, that tells you a lot. That sells the story. But McCarthy, Gruden, if they continue to be less than what the organization was hoping their hires would bring, then I think they start moving into that picture of being in the hot seat. On to the next two guys. These are two that I think are on the hot seat, but shouldn't be. So it's kind of interesting. We're going from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other. We'll start with Vic Fangio. I know the record's not pretty, but the defense has been good, and that's why you hire Vic Fangio. Nobody thought when they hired Vic Fangio that, okay, he's going to save the QB position. He's not Sean McVay, which, I mean, you could even make an argument. He was hired to save Jared Goff, make that work, and ultimately look at where they are now. They felt like they had to move on from Goff, get an upgrade, and they gave up 2 future ones to do it. So you might be able to say McVay failed in that initial attempt. I'm not saying McVay's a bad coach or he's on this list or anything like that, but Vic Fangio is not a guy you hire to, resurrect desperately bad QB play. That's not his niche. He's a defensive guru he had the Chicago Bears defense at the best in the NFL just a couple of years ago, and really the guy we'll talk about next won a Coach of the Year award thanks in large part to the efforts of Vic Fangio. And the defense has been fantastic in Denver, and I think it's only gotten better. Justin Simmons continues to improve as a player. They just drafted Patrick Surtain. They just added Baron Browning, and they have Malik Reed as backup edge rushers behind Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, who, need I remind you, have only played 4 games together over the last 2 seasons. This will be the first time, barring any injuries. Hopefully they play all 17 games if you're a Broncos fan. It'll be the first time that's happened since 2018. Vic Fangio should not be on the hot seat, but in a business of winning games, the record would need to be better to prevent him from being considered on the hot seat. And I think a lot of it really falls on John Elway and now George Patton. They're going to have to find the answer to the QB position, because otherwise this roster is stacked. Whether it's Aaron Rodgers, Drew Lock takes that 3rd-year leap that we saw from Josh Allen, or Teddy Bridgewater just finds a way to be good enough and this team can make a playoff push. They play in a tough division, though. They're going to need an elite QB, and that's why it's got to be Rodgers or it's got to be bust. You get a top pick next year, and you try to do what you should have done this year and really take Justin Fields at 9. Don't know if that's going to be another opportunity to do that next offseason, but regardless, Vic Fangio, I think, has done a terrific job, but got to win football games to avoid being on the hot seat. And then that takes us to Matt Nagy, who, again, 2018 Coach of the Year. I think a lot of credit has to go to Vic Fangio and his his role of that as the defensive coordinator. But hey, Matt Nagy led the Bears to a 12-4 record in year 1 of his tenure. And Bears fans won't tell you this now, but that first year under Matt Nagy, plenty of Chicago fans were fully convinced that Mitch Trubisky could be their guy. Fast forward a couple of years, that narrative has changed drastically. And I think Matt Nagy, the fact he has an over 500 record, he's made the playoffs 2 of the 3 years with the likes of Trubisky and Nick Foles, signals how good of a coach he is. I think my biggest problem was the year they did make the playoffs, and it was David Montgomery's rookie year, they just like refused to run the football, and they wanted Trubisky, for whatever reason, throwing 35 plus times a game. And that's never going to be the answer with Mr. Trubisky under center. Then last year, though, they get hot at the end of the season. The defense is playing pretty solid, and they're using David Montgomery. And if you had him in your fantasy team, that dude carried you. I know he did. And if they had to face him late in the year, it was not something you were looking forward to. So with that adjustment being made, that was the one flaw I saw in Matt Nagy. Sometimes he would get away from the run game when he didn't need to. There were plenty of games where they had less than 10 rushes in a contest, and that is not good when Mr. Trubisky is your QB. We're getting off of that point. This is a city that is desperate for a championship, and Ryan Pace really has found a way to get Matt Nagy attached to his hip, and Pace has not done a good job. I would grade him as a bad hire, in my opinion, as a general manager. He has not drafted well, specifically at the most important position. You trade up one spot to get Mr. Trubisky, give up future assets when you could have traded back maybe, or you could have just stayed put and taken Deshaun Watson or Patrick Mahomes, who are significantly better than Mr. Trubisky. So maybe you're saying Ryan Pace is the problem, and I would agree. He did have a better draft this year, both at the top of the draft with guys like Justin Fields and Tevin Jenkins, but also late in the draft, Kyrus Tonga, Khalil Herbert, Thomas Graham Jr., a bunch of guys that I really like in the back half of the draft. So maybe he's done enough to save his job as well. But Matt Nagy is on the hot seat, but he shouldn't be, in my opinion. He's done enough to get this team to the playoffs twice in the last 3 years. That is unbelievable. But this is a city that expects more, wants more, and especially if Rodgers leaves the division and the Bears are underwhelming this year, then I definitely think there's a large likelihood, a very high possibility of Matt Nagy being fired, despite him being a Coach of the Year winner and having a plus 500 record and making the playoffs 2 different occasions. Moving on to the top 2 guys, I think these are like the most likely to be fired at the end of the year, but I still think there's a good possibility and pathway for these two to keep their jobs. We'll start talking about Zach Taylor. He was hired after being the QB coach under Sean McVay, and it was, the thinking of the disciple following, this offensive guru that has, in a lot of ways changed the way we play football. McVay and Andy Reid have put the modern NFL offense in motion, and it was thought, okay, the Bengals getting Zach Taylor, that's what they're going for. The offenses really haven't looked the same, but I will say I'm a Steelers fan, and I will tell you firsthand, there have been times where Zach Taylor has outcoached Mike Tomlin, X's and O's wise, which is not something that you will hear a lot of people say. But you go to that Monday Night Football game last year, and the Steelers got embarrassed in Cincinnati. And there's a couple of other games down the stretch last year where Zach Taylor put together awesome game plans and points of attack that kept that team competitive without Joe Burrow. And that is just miracle work. Even the statement kind of just speaks for itself. Now this year, you got Joe Burrow. You take Jamar Chase at pick number 5. That offense should not be a problem. But if it is, then I think that he's got to go, right? Like if this offense isn't top 12, he's probably not keeping his job. 12 might be a little high, top 16. If they're not in the top half of the league, Zach Taylor's probably fired because that's his bread and butter. That's why you hired him. I know the offensive line isn't great, but it is better than what it was last year. And now you have an elite pass-catching wide receiver core, and you have Joe Burrow in year number 2, where you expect him to be better because he's not a rookie, and that just makes sense on paper. The defense is a big question mark, and that might be why Taylor also loses his job. If he's able to get that offense to a high enough peak where they could then pivot and go hire a defensive-minded coach, maybe a Todd Bowles next year round, which is amazing he didn't get a head coaching job after being the defensive coordinator of a super winning team, but that's not what we're talking about. But that could be a hire that in Cincinnati's mind is like, all right, Taylor got the offense to an elite status. Bowles is not going to mess that up. We just need him to coach up the defense, and we feel like we can be competitive in the AFC North. And that might be a realistic path to take. And that's why I could see a number of different possibilities in which Zach Taylor loses his job. But at the same time, I have to say, if this team goes 7-10, 8-9 range, the offense is great, and really it's like, a couple pieces on the defense they feel like they could, replace in the draft, I could totally see Zach Taylor sticking around. This is also a team that gave Marvin Lewis a very long tenure as the head coach, despite not racking in a bunch of playoff wins. So this is a patient organization. A lot of the ways that we talked about with Jerry Jones, the Cowboys, and their relationship with Jason Garrett, they were patient. They didn't want to rush to a coaching decision and fire that guy and then try to have to go through this, this decision-making process to find his replacement. I could see Cincinnati doing a lot of the same things, but Zach Taylor, as of right now, has not brought the elite level of offense that we saw from Sean McVay and that we expected from the Zach Taylor offense. Granted, he hasn't had a whole lot of talent. That's why this year is huge. He plays in a good division. I know that makes things difficult, but minimum, you got to see that offense shine for Zach Taylor to keep his job. And on to number one, Cliff Kingsbury. Look, I mean, he's got a lot of talent on that roster. And his teams, it's kind of wild to see where we are in the NFL. He's going into his third season, but head coaching decisions be made quicker now than ever, in my opinion. And Cliff Kingsbury has gotten off to hot starts each of the first 2 years, and he has made that offense more efficient. That air raid system is better for creating pass protection. You know, like your offensive line typically has better numbers than they would in a different offensive system. So Kingsbury, has cleaned up a lot of those areas. But at the same time, this is a team that needs to be making a playoff push, especially this year. You bring in a playmaker like J.J. Watt, 3-time defense player of the year. He might not still be that guy anymore, but he's J.J. Watt, and he's a damn good pass rusher, and he's pretty good against the run. You draft Zaven Collins a year after you take Isaiah Simmons, so you're taking linebacker back-to-back drafts. That's a position that is going to be vital. You have to keep your eyes on that. How do those two play? Those two players single-handedly might determine the future of Cliff Kingsbury, but also how he uses the offense. He's starting to come under a ton of flack for not using DeAndre Hopkins in a lot of different ways, and I think all those points are valid. He is such a dynamic wide receiver, and he's so well-rounded. You have to use him in a lot of different ways. Play him in the slot. Play him on the right side of the field. I'd just be happy to see DeAndre Hopkins not lined up on the left side where he's been on an island thus far into his Arizona tenure. Granted, it's only been 1 year, so a lot can change. And that's why I'm saying this is early on. None of these coaches I'm saying right now are going to be fired, but Cliff Kingsbury has got to produce this year. He's got to find ways to make the offense carry them to the playoffs. I mean, a lot of ways they have got to make the playoffs. If they go 8-9, I think there's a coaching change made. And maybe I'm being too harsh on Cliff. They do play in the best division in football, but minimum winning record. If you get to 10 wins, I'd feel safe with him sticking around, but given the talent on that roster, it's a team that should be around 10 wins. Again, I know the division's tough. They play Russell Wilson. They play, Jimmy Garoppolo / Trey Lance twice a year. They play Matt Stafford twice a season. But that's all the more reason you need to see progression. San Francisco is only going to get better. Meanwhile, Russell Wilson probably has another 5 to 6 good years in him. Matt Stafford at least has a couple, 2 to 3, maybe 4. I'm a bigger Stafford fan than a lot, but you got to start seeing some signs that you can be competitive in that division. And if it doesn't happen this year with Cliff Kingsbury, you need to rethink it. Additionally, year 3 of Kyler Murray, you only got 2 more years after this upcoming season on that rookie contract, and even that 5th-year option. That 5th-year option is becoming a bigger price tag than it has been in years past, due to the new CBA, I should say. So I feel like this is a huge season for Cliff Kingsbury to prove I can be the guy to carry this team to, it starts with a winning record, but in and around double-digit wins, fighting for a playoff spot once we get to the final 2 weeks of the season. Those are all steps in the direction that could save Cliff Kingsbury's job, and maybe there's no firings this year. I mean, honestly, when I was looking at this, not a whole lot of coaches I say should lose their job. As of right now, I wouldn't want any of these 6 guys to get fired. I cannot say that enough. None of these 6 guys, in my opinion, right now, need to be fired. But once we get in the NFL season, if the Bengals or the Cardinals are underwhelming, yeah, you got to make a change. Or if the Bears are really they look putrid, or there's no plan in place for Justin Fields, and that's evident, you make a change. But as of right now, I wouldn't want any of these 6 guys fired. I think they all do a good enough job, and there's other reasons why they aren't having the success that maybe was expected when they were hired. But this has been my list of 6 coaches who already are or should be on the hot seat in the coming future. Just something to keep your eyes on as we continue to get closer to the 2021 NFL season, and obviously to watch throughout the upcoming NFL season. Comment some coaches you think should be or already are on the hot seat, and give me some predictions on who may get fired after the season. It's really rare to see no firing, so if someone's going to lose their job, give me your prediction down in the comments section. And also, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, want more sports content like this, please consider subscribing. That's all I got for you. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.